which is they had some issues, so we still call 19 members. We're trying to get them on board because I think they have some internal issues in their association.
Okay.
Once that's sorted out, I think they will come back. And then Papua New Guinea wants to get back, join us.
Okay.
And then Pakistan also was an earlier member. We are trying to get them on board. So we're trying to expand as best as possible.
Okay.
But, so that's where we are at the moment. Actively 18 members, 18 countries.
18 countries, yeah. And how often does the association meet?
Actually, the convention is every 20 months between maximum.
Okay.
So, and then we have a board meeting in between. It's 10th month after the convention. So halfway through, we have a board meeting.
Okay. Okay. So the board meeting is once in a year, is it?
9 months, roughly about 9 to 10 months, and then the convention is about 18 to 20 months.
18 to 20 months, yeah.
So we will meet twice at least. Yeah. That is by physical meeting. Then of course that doesn't prevent the various committees to work via email or even video calls.
Okay. Okay. Well,
yeah. So we are quite active right now. So we have had several meetings since COVID started. So it's not so bad.
I think your staff are trying to tell you it's time to start.
Yeah, I think let's do that. Yeah. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the International Stakeholder Agencies meeting edition 2. This time we are meeting with FIDIC, as you all know. This is the first time we are meeting FIDIC, and we are being graced this afternoon or this morning, wherever you are, or this evening, by Dr. Nelson. Dr. Nelson is the CEO of FIDIC. I met him last year at the headquarters of IFAWPCA in Manila, and I had a very good discussion with him about the developing our close relationship between FIDIC and IFAWPCA, because as I understand, most of the countries in the Asia and Western Pacific region who are our members use the FIDIC document as their contract document. And we also have a lot of members executing the FIDIC documents while carrying out the Asian Development Bank projects and JICA projects. So I found it important that we start to build a relationship with FIDIC so we benefit from on different fronts. So historically, I think it is a very notable day today, because this is the first time we are having a high-level discussion like this. And thank you very much, Doctor, for accepting my invitation and taking time out of your busy schedule to be here this afternoon. Dr. Nelson was very positive about how we could develop our relationship, and I have had with my panelist team, we had a small discussion yesterday about how we would move forward during today's discussion. So this meeting is not about going into the detailed questions or technical questions, but this meeting is more about how we can structure a long-term, methodical, organized relationship with FIDIC and the International Federation of Asian and Western Pacific Contractors Associations. I invited our Rapporteur of IFAWPCA and also the Rapporteur of our Contracts Committee, Mr. Desmond Hill, to join us today as a panelist, as well as Mr. Oliver Wee, the Deputy Chairman of our Contracts Committee, as a panelist, and also our Executive Director, Mr. Levy Espiritu, as a panelist. What we will do today is, I have some basic general questions that has been put forward to me by the panelists, and I will try to have a small engagement with Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin, right? Am I pronouncing it right? Sorry, Doctor. So I'll try to
very
have,
well. You did very well.
yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Doc. So I'll try to have doctors' views about how we could move forward with this relationship and promote the FIDIC forms of contract, as well as getting answers to our problems and issues, especially under the current COVID-19 situation through the FIDIC system. So today we will have a general discussion. We are not going to go into specifics. So it's not a technical session. It is a high-level meeting, actually observed by the board of IFAWPCA and by the panelists. So, and invited to other members also to witness how, and this fast development relationship has been a positive development after my meeting in Manila last year. I invited Doctor to join our convention, which was supposed to be here in the Maldives this month, but unfortunately the circumstances have made us to postpone this for the year ahead, 2021 June. And we are confident and hopeful that we could have this meeting by then. Again, it's the IFAWPCA's 45th convention, and our invitation for you to join and address that opening ceremony is still valid and open as it is. Without further ado, I will just give the floor to Dr. Nelson to address our board and our officers and our members today. Thank you very much, Doctor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Should I call Mr. President Mohamed Ali Janah? Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes, you can call me Janah, yeah?
Thank you, if I call you Janah. Well,
thank you,
first of all, it's a pleasure to be invited to join this gathering. I'm extremely delighted. I first of all bring you greetings from our board, particularly our president, Bill Howard, who is actually based in Boston, in the United States. As you probably know, FIDIC is made up of 102 countries around the world, with 5 geographical regions, which is Europe, Africa, Middle East, Asia Pacific, as in FIPAC, which is southern, what I call the Southern Americas and the North American section. And our board is made up of 9 people, which are represented from that. We actually met, believe it or not, yesterday, and I did mention to them that we are having this meeting. They bring their sincere greetings, and I hope in time there will be an opportunity between the president and various committee of the organization to meet our board. But now I take it that it's a great opportunity to have a second opportunity to meet you. Yes, we are absolutely right. We had a real opportunity to meet briefly, if I may say so, last year in Manila. I think my visit was a flying visit. Under normal circumstances, it will have been a more debating, more opportunity to get to know each members and also to foster a closer relationship. Having said that, in the usual British way, it's better to have a short period than not having the opportunity. So I was delighted. As you probably gather, I have a background that is origin from Africa, but I have actually lived in UK for 45 years. My experience really goes all over the world, including most of your countries that you cover in terms of the Asia and the Western Pacific there. So in a way, I have an understanding of that. My initial comment said it was a delight to meet you last year. We did promise that we're going to meet you this year during convention, but hey who, COVID-19 is here. We just pray that there is no COVID-20, so that 2021 will be a year that we can officially meet as an organization and support each other. Last year when we did meet, we touched on a number of issues which excite me about opportunity for further collaboration. I think if I'm right correctly, at that time we are just at the crux of formalizing our relationship with a lot of the, what I call the international financial institutions. At the time, we've just signed an agreement with the World Bank. I had a visit to Manila to talk to ADB. I've just completed an agreement with the AIIB in Beijing. And we've since then signed an agreement with African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, European Bank for Development and Reconstruction, and also Caribbean Development Bank. So we have actually covered most of the international financial institutions. I, by my sin, came into FIDIC about 2 years ago. but I've actually known FIDIC for over 15, 16 years. Whilst my background is construction, and I'm proud to say I started as a contractor with a great contracting company called Tarmac when they were Tarmac, and I did my apprenticeship through there. So I really understand construction from the buildability side of it and the contractual relationship between client, the supply chain, and the main contractor and subcontractor. So that gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to have conversation. I do believe that, you know, with all the conversation before I dive into my message to you and your colleague is that COVID-19 is something that nobody ever expected, and therefore it's caught most of the world. And I'm sure that your organization by surprise. A lot of people have lost their life. A lot of people have lost their, you know, real, you know, earning. And I take it that we started that from issue about health, you know, crisis. We move into economic crisis. Now we are looking into social crisis. So putting it from that point of view, I think it's fair point to say that we've moved at different phases of this COVID-19. And what FIDIC has been trying to do, in addition to fostering relationship and build stakeholder, is as I'm sure that you've had your session with Chinka, Mr. Fang, who's a very good friend of mine. We are fostering very strong relationship with the Contracting Association in China, particularly those who are operating in the international arena. Likewise, in the International Contracting Association in Europe-based, we are fostering a very close relationship. What I did say to you last year, which I still insist that we should do, is that as we go through our journey in future of developing contract, it's absolutely imperative that we do need to engage stakeholders. And we've been engaging other stakeholders, but I think, you know, we should add your organization to the list of organizations that we should. And I talk about engagement. The engagement comes at several levels. At the drafting of contract, it's very important that we actually look at what I call friendly user to look at what is coming through the pipeline and to engage to make sure there's a balanced view that comes through in the document as we draft it. When the contract document is ready before we publish, we go for legal review. Again, it's also important to make sure we have legal representative from different jurisdictions, because FIDIC contracts traditionally perhaps is based on common law, but it's also applicable in some different parts of the law where you go civic law. So it's very important that we have jurisdiction coverage, we have cultural coverage, and we have geographic coverage. So from that point of view, I have informed our contract committee, which is led by a gentleman called Vincent Lulu. Ideally, I would have brought him to be here, but he's committed at the moment, that we should make sure that in future, that when we go through our draft contract development process, that your organization is on our list of those that we should consult. And I do believe that the right approach to go for that would be an opportunity where you identify people who are specialists in contract formulation from your organization that we can consult on a regular basis. They themselves can then consult a wider audience within your stakeholders, your 18 or 19 or 20 countries, to make sure that it's not concentrated feedback, but you have a diverse feedback. So I give you that commitment last year, and I'll continue to maintain that this year. Second point that I want to touch on is what FIDIC has been doing since COVID-19. And I'm sure that you are aware of that. Some of the questions that we'll be talking about later on alluded to those issues. When COVID hit us, we were also planning, just like you, annual convention. Last year was in Mexico. Year before it was in Berlin. This year was meant to be in Geneva. Well, Geneva is the home of United Nations and the home of World Health Organization. So we are very close to the event, and we knew that this thing is not going to happen and close very quickly, that there's a possibility of even a second wave. So your program was June, July, our program is September. We had to cancel and postpone that to 2021. And I hope that there will be no COVID-20, which means 2021 will be a good opportunity for your organization and our organization to work closer together. So I'm working on that, trust me. So moving through that, what have we done? We recognize very quickly that the impact of the COVID-19 in our sector is huge, from design development to construction to even asset management. It was very, very important that we need to address those issues. And rather than trying to travel around the world, which we are not allowed to travel, we all leverage on the digital world, which is about this webinar process. And I'm pleased that everybody is using this in a way that is helping to bring people together in a constructive manner that help us to move forward. What we did was to look at all the issues that may impact our industry, from our members association, their members in their countries, to what the issue means on construction projects. Is a force measure, not force measure? How does it impact joint venture, collaboration, design and build? How does it impact the consultant? And how does it impact, what I call your health and safety of your staff, your people, your supply chain? How does it impact issue about your balance sheet? How do you get yourself ready? What is the risk and potential liability that comes across into that process? And we went through the whole issue about safe working, social distancing, and the whole issue that comes about how do we come out of COVID-19. That process took us 10 weeks intensive program. And we're very delighted that we've delivered 18 webinars that covers the whole of that topic that I've covered. And during the same period, I think it's probably said we had nearly 9,000 people all over the world from 150 countries that get involved. It was not restricted to FIDIC members only or consulting engineer. It was open to all stakeholders all over the world to engage. And I can report to you that beside the consulting engineer, the highest second participant was contractors. So that is good news. And the other point I can mention is, in addition to the 9,000 that attended that 18 webinars, we had over 10,000 on YouTube that is following every single program. So I will make a message and a plea to you and to your organization. Please go to the FIDIC YouTube. The YouTube is available to all your members, regardless of where they are in the world. You don't need to sign in, you don't need to pay for it, and they can listen to it. And the advice, best of advice that you can get, even better than me. So I moderated that particular program, and you probably think I'm full of ideas and I can find the world solution. No, I don't. What I can bring to you is what came out of that meeting. First of all, is we produced 3 guidance notes over that period, which again are influenced from that particular conversation. One was a generic one to anybody in construction industry about looking at your business, looking at your staff, make sure your balance sheet is okay, looking at what government is doing, how the government is helping, taking advantage of government subsidies, looking at contracts, and looking at your business. That was the first one. The second, guidance note we produced was very broad, very comprehensive, but it was looking very specifically to do contract. We painted a number of scenarios, and I will put my hands up that I did not write that various scenario. We have an expert that's made of 14 people from all over the world that sat together that identifies 6 possible scenarios of what may happen, and they try to address that as best as possible with the limited information at that time. And I can tell you, the good news is the document is widely read in the industry. And we know that it's not perfect because the scenario were limited to the information available to us at that time. And we are taking feedback from the industry to make sure we make that document a live document, and we keep updating it so that we can paint different scenarios. And your organization is highly welcome to share with us, which I'm sure that there will be an opportunity for us to look at other scenarios which we haven't thought about, and we'll be delighted to address that and to produce a version 2 of the document. So from that point of view, I'm pleased that we're making some progress. My plea, if I can start off, is by saying the pandemic caught everybody by surprise. And as a result of that, it doesn't matter what contractual relationship you have right now. What really matters is how do we maintain sustainability of the construction and engineering industry? How do we make sure that relationship between client, engineer, client, contractor, engineer, contractor, contractor, supply chain, how do we maintain that relationship in a very cohesive that sustain the industry, that no company is going bust, which is very important? How do we make sure cash is being managed in the industry? How do we look at collaborative approach whereby every parties to a contract are talking to each other and seeking a common platform to resolve potential issues? And I use the word potential issue because not necessarily they are issues. And I do believe strongly that when people open a dialogue where they're speaking to each other and they have a common relationship, most of issue can be solved. But I do know that contract is contract. And when things fall apart, people rely on the contract as a means of resolving the issue. I do believe that the contract that FIDIC has produced is a very balanced contract that respects individual stakeholders, that understand the risk and apportion of risk in a way. But there are parts of the contract that people will be testing whether can I exercise this contract, this clause and that clause. Particularly the issue of force majeure. Is it force majeure or not force majeure? Big debate. Am I entitled to additional extension of time? Big debate. Am I entitled to additional, fee or, expenditure? Debate. If there is no issue in our country, but we cannot get the supply to do, how do we deal with that? These are the big issues that everybody is facing. And to be honest, I do not believe that, there is one solution that deal with it. What we've been advocating is communication, communication, communication among various members. Second point is the issue about record keeping. Yes, the clauses are there to protect both parties, but keeping record and communicating with various parties to make sure you let people know your position is also equally important. There are various clauses in different FIDIC contract documents that we can close and we can talk about. And I'm sure that your colleague wants to put one or two questions to me. But the key point for me is the clauses are there to guide individual party and to protect individual party. I pride myself, and FIDIC pride itself, is that we try to avoid litigation as much as possible. And we are a big advocate of alternative dispute resolution, which start from negotiation between CEO to CEO to what I call mediation. What is the gap between both expectation? How do we come into a halfway house? There is the other alternative, which is adjudication, which is heavily bear on in the FIDIC contract. And there are issues that comes into that. How do you do the appointment? And do you need FIDIC to come into it or not? My advocate is always been, if the two parties can find the right adjudicator to find a solution, you don't need to come to FIDIC. But should that prove difficult, you're welcome to come to FIDIC, and FIDIC will advise. So that goes on to that stage. And if the worst comes to us, which we never promote, is one about arbitration, which is very expensive. But either way, it's about looking at different process you are and the relationship and trying to find a solution forward. I suspect I can go on and on and on, and based on my experience, but what I think would be appropriate is if I stop at this point and to let your colleague opportunity for them to throw a question at me, and I'll do the best I can. But before I do that, I want to leave the thought with you, which is FIDIC produced a number of contract documents for different contract scenario, whether it's design and build, whether it's a turnkey contract or the traditional design, or whether it's white book or it's pink book or the red book or the yellow book, the rainbow suit. I do not profess to be an expert in the whole field. I have huge people behind FIDIC that works on that. But what I can give you is a high level response on issues that may be of concern to your members. And if there's a takeaway, then I will take that away. And hopefully this will be a beginning of a regular dialogue to make sure we can address any issues of concern. Jamal, I think at that point, I'm going to stop and allow your colleague to put questions to me and we can have a proper conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor. Actually, just to highlight, our federation has been was established in 1956. So it's we are 64 years old right now. It's quite an established federation, and I am the 45th president, and the current board, executive board, is the 45th executive board in session. And we have special conditions of contract committee, which has been looking into various forms of contracts and addressing these issues over time. So I think when we discuss our future relationship, we have a system in place already that once that link is established with your federation, we could work positively and very closely together So it's not that we have to reinvent a situation and then get the people on board, but we have a very good team with a chairman and vice chairman and a rapporteur heading the conditions of contract committee. So I think it's a matter of just taking it forward. Yesterday, we sent some of the questions. We don't expect you to answer these questions in this forum, but if there's anything we can discuss right now. So there are a few questions that have been forwarded by our panelists. So I will just highlight some of those, and then we see how we go. All right.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Fine.
So I think instead of having everyone speak right now, I thought that I will just try to represent, and if there is any intervention required by the panelists, they could intervene while I do this. All right. Is that okay, Mr. Desmond? Is that okay, Oliver? Mr. Levy, is that okay with you guys?
Okay, Janah, okay.
Okay, thank you. All right. So our first question from the panelists would be, most of the contractors are facing immediate cash flow crisis to the pandemic. What are the remedies that can be availed by contractors under the FIDIC contracts? I know you have been doing a lot of work. You have been producing documents. So I'm sure you can guide us what to follow and how to go about it.
Thank you very much. I think the issue about contractors facing immediate cash flow issue is very profound. I think that particular issue is not only contractors, it's everybody through the supply chain are facing that issue. And I think what I tend to look at is we have to look at individual country, what the government is doing and how the government is supporting. But if we take it purely at macro level, which is very much on government level, in some countries around the world, you'll find the government intervention is actually quite important because they consider that infrastructure, whether it's social infrastructure or economic infrastructure, and I make a distinction between the two. The social one is education, hospitals, and all the things that that is required. Economic infrastructure is the road, bridges, and the airport, and all of that. Most parts of the world, they perceive that level of infrastructure as critical infrastructure. And therefore, government has done a lot of bailout in countries whereby they're saying, whatever you do, you must make sure your commitment to contractors, you maintain that, regardless of which contract they use, whether it's FIDIC contract or not FIDIC contract or it's domestic contract. So some countries, they've advocated continuous retention and payment of people to make sure that companies do not actually go bust because of cash. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me that Janah, is that companies don't tend to go bust because they are not profitable. They go bust because of lack of cash. Cash is the blood of any company, and lack of blood flowing, that means the company can be starved. So whether it's FIDIC contract or not FIDIC contract, the primary issue is your government doing anything in your country to support? If at macro level there is no support, then what tends to come through is the relationship between the contractor and the client. And ideally, you assume that there is a very cordial relationship for the contractor to understand that he or she, whoever is leading the party, need to engage country with the client. The reason why I say that is very simple. It is in the best interest of both parties that the project becomes number one. We want the project to be successful. In my time as a contractor, when I start, groundbreaking, or when I finish and crack the bottle of champagne, those are the two exciting times for me as a contractor. When I used to be an engineer building work, groundbreaking, and both two are the two opportunities for parties to come together to celebrate the beginning of a new life of a project and completion of one project and build a relationship to another one, which means you don't want to work for one client and don't want to work for them again. You want to continue to work for them and a relationship. So therefore, my first advice is really, you look for a common ground where the contractor can approach the client and say, look, we have a crisis issue. This crisis, we need to mitigate it. It's in your interest for us to finish this project. You do not wish us to go bankrupt because we haven't got cash. So there will be opportunity for what payment can be covered, either to cover the materials on site or commitment of activities, which it isn't really about contractual issue, it's really about common sense. And I do believe strongly that sort of common sense prevail if there's a good relationship between the client and the contractor. It's the same thing with the engineer and supply chain. But you and I know that sometimes that relationship is not as cordial as it should be. And therefore, we've got to find a way is what are the fallback within the contract that gives you opportunity to find a way. Some part of the contract, if it's FIDIC contract, gives you opportunity to actually say, yes, we can do more work. We have our overhead, we have our front-end prelims item, and these are items that actually, whether we do something or we don't do something, we need to incur those costs, and whether activity level is continued or not. Because if we get to the bottom of it, what's the causation? It's not that the contractor do not wish to work, neither the client does not want to work to be done. It's about we are frustrated by the situation that prevent both parties to do what they have to do. So from my point of view, I always say there are circumstances in the situation where you can look at the contract as a fallback, and there are various clauses in the contract, because it depends on your contract that you're losing, what type of contract, design and build, traditional. So rather than quoting individual clauses, I'll probably say, look into the contract, see where the opportunity are for you to notify. I think this is the key point that Kim saying, to make sure, first of all, you have on record that you are frustrated from doing the work. And second point, that you are entitled to get paid for activities, even though you are not progressing because the situation is being frustrated. And this is very, very important. And what I take as a key message from my point of view is that the employer is entitled to ask the contractor to prove that whether I do the work or not, I have committed this. For example, your prelim, your overhead, if you are stopped to do that. So there is clauses in the various contracts, and I'm not using this purely as FIDIC contract. In any contract, if the contract is fair and balanced, that I will advise the contractor and supply chain to go into it and see which clauses give them opportunity. Yes, on the FIDIC contract, there is opportunity for entitlement, for payment of activities which are due because of the situation you find. And the other one that comes into it, are you entitled to additional time? Yes, of course, you will be entitled to additional time. But then again, it comes back to you need to have on record and you need to notify. The various clauses are in there to guide the individual, but not notifying the client representative, which is the engineer, and not notifying or keeping a record of your expenses and your process and your labor costs makes it very difficult to prove what your entitlement is. Yeah, in a simple answer, yes, you are entitled, but you have to work within the jurisdiction of the contract.
Thank you very much for that. That was very, very detailed and very enlightening. And I think that's also our understanding of the situation. This situation has not been created by governments. This situation is not created by contractors, not by anyone. So it's a situation that fell upon us. So I think we all have to think out of the box solutions as well, because it's a new situation for us. I think the important thing is that everyone is taken care of. That is what I believe, that everyone's interest is taken care of in the best interest of the economies in the industries. Secondly, I have just a few questions because I don't want to drag this into a very technical session, and I don't want to tire you also.
No, feel free.
Yeah, all right.
I'm big
I
enough
don't want to make
say,
you tired also. There is a big question about extension of time on projects because we have the normal EOTs. So are there any further EOTs that would be allowed under the FIDIC contracts pursuant to the pandemic? How are you looking at it? What's FIDIC's position, and what are we going to do about it?
Right. I think I'll start off by saying there are various clauses in FIDIC contract. If you take a typical red book, which is your traditional one, that is, designer does the design, the client then appoint the contractor to do the traditional build, and you use the red book. Clauses such as 8.5 clause, it's a delay, either caused by authority. Clauses, 13.3 tells you that changes in the legislation. or issues to do with force majeure. There are various clauses that comes into there, and each of them need to be tested. I think if you take about issue about authority, which is changes by government, yes, nobody asked for COVID-19. If you remember in my opening speech, I talked about, we started with health crisis, people being alive. Then we move into what I call economic crisis. And now we are looking into the new normal, which is a social crisis. We need to move on to that. I think any sensible government will take a decision, and I use the word sensible government, and please don't quote me, a sensible government will take a decision to say, the health of my nation is primary. I want to have citizens that believe in me, and I want to maintain a leadership that I want people to follow me. And therefore, they will declare it's not safe to work. And if that decision is made, then you have an authority under the clause to say the government have declared that it's not safe to work, and therefore you have a grant under the FIDIC contract document, which is, I think, is clause 8.5, that said delay caused by authority. That's the authority of the government saying it's not safe to work, lockdown, go home, you can't do that, and that is in the public domain. You can rely on that. That's interpretation, a very correct interpretation of the FIDIC clause on clause 8.5. Because what that means is that you can basically immediately, as a contractor, the government made the decision, you notify your client. On the clause 8.5, the authority of country XYZ has made a decision that it's not safe to work and it's locked down and you are not encouraged to work in your place of work. So you have an authority. Then on that authority, you can then notify the client, let the client know that you cannot because you are being prohibited by government to do that. And therefore, you have an entitlement to extension of time. That's a clear-cut issue that comes into that. The other one is changing legislation. Government may turn around and say, yes, it's a critical infrastructure. You have to continue, but it's not actually safe for you to continue to work the way you used to work. You have to maintain social distancing. So there's a change in legislation, which under your health and safety before, you can work close together, but under the new law, you cannot work close together. That again gives you a right to actually notify your client that, yes, you have the authority, you have a change to legislation, and therefore you are forced, to work in a different way that is completely different from the way you used to work. Now, that to me gives you a second line of, entitlement. The third one is really about force majeure. This is a real big word. Force majeure, do we have force majeure? I suspect yes, in principle. And is it a case, what does the force majeure mean? Does that mean it gives opportunity for everybody to be claiming against each other? No, because both parties are equally impacted. The client is impacted, the contractor is impacted, the supply chain is impacted. So basically, force majeure says we have circumstances where we cannot control, it's out of our control, and everything's stopped. But being force majeure doesn't mean you are entitled to additional money. It means that we stop work, and then you are entitled to additional time to cover the time where you cannot do what you have to do. And then being an issue where you may have to stop work does not mean you are automatically entitled to additional money. You have to prove that as a consequence of you not being able to do that work because of force majeure, there are 5 tests under the FIDIC contract that you have to satisfy. And those tests, if you can tick those tests one by one, and you convince yourself you've had that test, you notify the client, and then there are processes that you need to put in place, then you have an opportunity to get extension of time. Extension of time does not guarantee there's additional money. But there is an opportunity for you to claim extension of time under 3 criteria. 1 is authority decision. 2, change of legislation. Doesn't matter, just working environment, particularly in the area of health and safety. If you pick that, it's not safe to work, it's not safe for you to go onto the site, you have a grant to claim for extension of time. And if it's force majeure, which is a pandemic situation that you have, and you can test those 5 tests under the clauses, then you are entitled for extension of time. I hope that's giving you some insight to where I'm coming from.
I think you're very right, Doctor. And also the new normal as we come out, and countries like us and Singapore and Malaysia, we all other members combined, we all have similar issues. It's like in Singapore, we were just discussing prior to this session, that there are so many hurdles, that so many health and safety requirements, new requirements on the health front, especially when you allow workers to come out and work. They have set a set of guidelines that needs to be followed. Here in the Maldives, we also have set up a guideline where a certain number of people can be transported at a time because of the social distancing. So you have to do double the number of trips in whichever mode of transport you do. So there's going to be an additional cost also. It's a new situation. So everyone has to understand that we cannot go back to what we were pre-pandemic until a vaccine or medicine is found. So I think you're very right. It's a different situation, and how we tackle the situation and how we engage with the clients and the government should be recorded and understood properly. So my next question is...
Can I intervene?
Yes,
please.
Yes, I just like to raise 2 points. So, Dr. Nelson, are you saying, based on your pronouncement, that parties may use the change of laws as the key ground in the recovery of costs, aside from reinforcing their claim for time extension, like delay caused by authorities, changes in legislation, and so on? Am I right?
What I'm saying is that the question was about extension of time. And I said the extension of time can be granted under 3 laws. 1, authority decision. 2nd, legislation, change in legislation. And 3rd one may be issue to do with force majeure. On the issue of force majeure, there are criteria that you need to be satisfied under the FIDIC contract document, provided one is able to convince himself that you've satisfied those, then there is a force majeure, then you are entitled to extension of time. As to issue to do with cost, let me paint a classic example. You tender for a project, you won the project. Halfway through the project, you have a pandemic. Government imposed a regulation that you cannot work, and therefore you have 10 weeks in your program where you can't do anything. So that 10 weeks, under the authority, you have legitimate right to ask for extension for that 10 weeks. But the 10 weeks may not cost you anything apart from stop. If there are issues to do with cost, i.e. you have your prelim is sitting there longer and there are other costs, then you have to prove that there is a record as a result of that extension of time that you have. But there is no guarantee that granting extension of time automatically means granting additional cost. Let me paint another example that Janah talked about, which I think I like that, which is the issue about now the word PPE is critical. You have to now buy another health and safety requirement, and all of those issues is additional cost. If you can prove that as a result of that decision, of the delay or the extension of time, as a result, you now have to incur additional cost to enable you to deliver that in a safe working environment that you did not anticipate, and your contract allow you to do that, you may be entitled to, but you have to have a clear record and you have to demonstrate the cause and effect. That's my point.
Very, very good. Thank you. I hope, Ms. Levy, that's answered.
For Mr. Janah, can I, the issue here is force majeure, and can we replace force majeure with fortuitous event and amend its definition to avoid ambiguity in the contractor's entitlement to costs incurred? Is that a possibility?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, please, again?
Is there a possibility of replacing force majeure with fortuitous event and amend its definition to avoid ambiguity?
The contract is the contract. If you sign a contract and the word you use in the contract stand, that word in contract stand. I think some contract, it doesn't have to be FIDIC contract. They will talk about, epidemic. They may talk about force majeure. And I think some contract, you don't even see the word pandemic, but they would never use the word pandemic. But what FIDIC does in the FIDIC contract, talk about exceptional circumstances. And that word, the test for exceptional circumstances, you need to be tested. If you can go through in the FIDIC contract and your exceptional circumstances, whatever it is, can prove those 5 items, you satisfy that. It doesn't matter what word you use. What matters most is those 5 tests are satisfied, and therefore you are qualified to consider the situation to be force majeure. I know that my legal paternity will cherish this opportunity to go into pontification on what is force majeure and the interpretation of words in any particular part of clause. That's not my day job. I don't profess to be an expert in that interpretation of single individual word, but what I know for sure, in the FIDIC contract, there is a test of what exceptional circumstances may mean. And if exceptional circumstances situation can be tested against those 5 points, then you can deem it to be force majeure. And then the consequence of what is the situation as a real cause for force majeure, you have the opportunity to go through that. You cannot change the word in the contract after you've signed the contract. The word is the word, to stay in there. What really matter most is the interpretation of that word, and precedent has been set in previous situation on whether you are under civil code work or whether you are on what I call common law. Then that gives you jurisdiction to see whether the situation you have fits into that particular word or not. In the case of FIDIC, we've taken a pragmatic approach to test the situation for what is an exceptional circumstances. And if the exceptional circumstances can be tested against those 5 and passed it, then technically you are entitled to extension of time.
Thank you
Dr.
very
Nelson, sorry, can I ask you a question? Looking forward, I think most contracts around the world, aside from FIDIC, basically have not catered for a situation like this COVID-19 situation. So is FIDIC basically looking into reviewing the conditions of contract, whatever color of books, to allow for such pandemic? Because now what has happened is that while you have given some so-called guidance in terms of what you can actually look for, but it is still basically subject to interpretation by the consultants and also the client, because it is not clear. And all contracts, I mean, I exposed to a couple of different contracts, whether it's local or FIDIC, and I find that nobody has actually looked into a situation of a pandemic. So we now have a lot of basically gray areas, as what Levy has mentioned, and then trying to say, will this be covered? Will that be covered? So finally, because it is a gray area, there will always be the parties looking after their own interests. While I agree with you that parties should sit down and try to find a common ground, but at the end of the day, the contractor's problem is very different from the client's problem. The client is basically funding the project. Okay, so he's looking at his pocket. The contractor basically has bidded for the contract, and he's looking for basically to finish the job within the contract sum that he's bidded. But he's got actually multiple problems because of his supply chain, his subcontractors, his suppliers, and everybody's asking basically that they won't come back unless the price has been adjusted. Now, upfront, people are still talking between main con and employer, but at the end, subcons and suppliers actually want immediate answer. And if they don't get an immediate answer, they just don't deliver or stop their works, because their form of contract may be slightly different. Right? So looking forward, will FIDIC be reviewing their conditions of contract to actually make it a bit clearer insofar as a pandemic like this is concerned?
Desmond, thank you very much for your question. It's a heavily loaded question, but I'll do my best to try and address that.
Sorry.
But I mean, to try and simplify it, you said the client and the contractor have different purpose. I do not share that, with all due respect. I think, you know, the client wants a good facility, the contractor wants to deliver a good facility. And therefore, project becomes the priority, and it is in everybody's interest to have that project completed on time and within budget. If client sets out from day one, thinking that there is no mutual interest to see the project completed on time to budget, then we have an industry that lacks trust and which is not sustainable. So I will try and address that from the point of view of, first of all, there are a number of questions you raised there. One, can FIDIC help to define and to make sure that at least there's a consistency in the language we use? The truth of the matter is FIDIC contract document is a dynamic document. It's not static. We are constantly taking feedback from the industry to see what works, what doesn't work, and how best, you know, our wordings in the contract being interpreted. If we believe there is a consistent misinterpretation of wording or the way things are being defined in the FIDIC contract, when we have the next issue of FIDIC contract, we always take that on board. And I'll cite an example of that, Desmond. We had a 1999 document red book, and it took us nearly 20 years. We listened to a lot of comments and criticism, some positive, some negative, some about just moving the contract to be more relevant in the days that we are now, because things change. And in 2017, we produced a new document which is more comprehensive, more user-friendly, allow project management, allow process for both client and contractor and engineer's role to be defined clearly. So that is there, and I do believe that, you know, apart from making it sound as if we think FIDIC document is perfect, no contract in the world is perfect. And it is imperative on those who are producing the contract to constantly review to make sure if there's gap in that document, they keep on improving it. That's the first answer that I'll give you. The second one that I will talk about is really about definition of words and consistency in the issue that everybody understands it. FIDIC represents 102 countries around the world. Yes, we probably the global contract document that most people use. The truth of the matter, if I may put it to you, Desmond, is I wish people use the contract in his balanced view that was produced by FIDIC. In most cases, people take the contract, they appoint lawyer, and the lawyer takes it apart, and they add various clauses and take various clauses out of it. So at the end of the day, you are never sure whether the document is as original as defined by FIDIC, which actually makes sure the balance of risk is actually properly apportioned. So when people say, I'm using FIDIC contract, I'm saying, which version? Is it the original one? And are you using the latest one? Those are the questions that I put across to people moving forward. But my plea to you and to anybody that is listening to this particular program is very much along the line that FIDIC is open for suggestion, but we do not write all the contracts in the world. We do not write other contracts. Some countries, they have their own domestic contract, which is an embellished version of which FIDIC contract. And we have no jurisdiction to sue them. One of the things we promoted recently, which may be helpful, we promote what we call the FIDIC Golden Principle, which is we now know over the years that people take FIDIC contract, they butcher it, they add few things to it, and when you finish up and it comes to the contractor, it's not the same contract that FIDIC started off with. So those golden principle is basically to say, if you are being told this contract is FIDIC contract, go and check various clauses. And these clauses, if they've been changed from the original one, buyers beware. Because if you change these clauses, you change the balance of risk. And as a result of that, it's no longer carry the same integrity of the FIDIC contract when we started. So if you are a contractor and you are bidding for a job and you take the FIDIC Golden Principle and you test it and you see that those clauses been amended, I would say you either decide to walk away from the contract or you price the risk in your contract to make sure you are fully up to speed and you are not actually working under the premise, this is a FIDIC standard contract. I cannot speak for other contracts which are being used around the world, but I do passionately believe that there's a need for standardization. There's a need for standardization in the language that we use, and there's a need for standardization on interpretation. That's why FIDIC produced what we call the FIDIC guide to our contract. And I would suggest to all your members that please, when you are looking at FIDIC contract, don't look at it, just purely what the lawyers of the client gave you, because they have a job. Go and get the FIDIC guide to that document and look at the interpretation of it and look at the risk and allocation in there before you price your tender. I hope that's satisfy your question. Desmond, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Nelson. Sorry, one last question. Will you be updating your guidance note in April where you give the 6 scenarios? And I think I have through IFAWPCA sent a list whether you'll be updating the scenarios and also updating the replies to the scenarios.
Desmond, the answer emphatically is yes. And I did say that in my opening speech to Janah that we are not static. The scenario that we produced was as a result of the webinar that we knew what question came out of the webinar. And that's the whole idea of this conversation. We could have locked down and said, you're on your own. Whatever the contractual issue between you and your client, you deal with it. We took the leadership role. We created this series of webinars so that we can understand the plight of people, the challenges in different jurisdictions, in different geography. We understand what government are doing in different countries. I'll give you a classic example. In UK, the UK said to all big contract that is going on, you must, as a client, continue to pay the contractor. Make sure we do not want contractor to go bust. And that law is applicable in UK. And if you go to Switzerland, which is my home base, they have different law where they never stop construction work during the whole process. So that's why I say you have to look at it. But in answer to your question, we are picking up feedback from the floor. We're picking up feedback from our stakeholders. And we have the intention, as I said to you earlier on, that is a version 1. We intend to look at what other scenario that may be playing. And actually, if you look through the scenario, that mainly cover contractors. Equally important, consultants are facing a lot of issues, and they've come to us and say, do you know something? Why did you look after the contractor scenario, but you haven't looked at the consultant scenario? Or the supply chain have come to us and say, you haven't looked at our supply. We are just down the food chain, and unless we have a back-to-back contract, we don't really get any remedy. So you haven't looked at the situation with suppliers of cement, of steels, or all of that. We can't answer all of that in one go, Desmond, but I think my plea to you is that if you have other scenario that is worth testing, we're quite happy to take them on board. I can't guarantee because I'm not a member of that particular committee. As Janah said, you have your own contract committee. My plea is that please, make it available to us. I will pass it to our contract team and they will add it to the scenario. Believe it or not, I think we may have more than 6 more. From the feedback we're having from the industry. We are looking to look at the consultant scenario. We're also looking at the supply chain, other people, the manufacturer, the product and all of that to try and address that so that we give a balanced view. Bearing in mind, we put that document together immediately after the webinar on force majeure. And I did say quite clearly, if you've been following the webinar that we produced after that it is meant to be a dynamic document. It's a live document. We keep revisiting it and we keep updating it as necessary. I hope that satisfies your question, Desmond.
Yes. Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Dr.
much.
Nelson.
We are running out of time. We have to be very quick, Oliver.
Yeah, Dr. Nelson, talking about the golden principle of FIDIC, there are a few points that we actually, as a contractor, are facing some difficulty over there. Now, we suggest that FIDIC should sort of identify certain core provisions that cannot be amended. One of the contractors' problem is we always face standard form of FIDIC, but with lots of amendments. That's the first thing we face. Okay, so I think that could fall under the FIDIC educational program, where FIDIC can actually do it during the training with your members and so on. Number 2 is, since we all know cash flow is the most important thing in a construction, well, we always feel that the time frame for resolving a claim or a dispute is rather long under FIDIC. Perhaps FIDIC can look into a amended way of dispute resolution, like having a DRA, the dispute resolution advisor, during the whole construction period from day 1. So the advisor can actually settle all the dispute interimly, and all are interim. Probably parties still can decide to go for arbitration at the end of the day. So at least the cash flow for the project would probably enhance the progress of the project. And
Oliver, you've raised two questions. I will very quickly give you the answer to those two questions, and those answers, I'm sure you will like it. Trust me, you will like it. The first one is the golden principle is really to protect the interests of the contractors and the various stakeholders, where we recognize that a lot of lawyers, they make their living by advising the client that we are here to protect your interests, and they themselves they will charge a ridiculous price, and they will tell you they don't take any risk, but they put all the risk on the contractors or the engineers. So the golden principle was set up on that premise that please, and can I put it this way to you, Oliver, the golden principle, we are not selling it. You can download it on our website free of charge. You know, please, I'll put it to your organization all over your 18 country. Please get your members to download it free of charge. We're not paying, we're not charging for it. Read it carefully. What he said exactly is what the point you raised. It identifies a number of significant clauses that are not to be changed under any circumstances, so that the balance of risk is not changed from what the intention plan was. So please encourage your members all over Asia Pacific to go and download it. It's free of charge, and take that. I won't call it Bible or gospel or Quran. Just take it as something when you are tendering for project. These shall not be touched. If at the point of tendering, you find out these clauses have been touched, then you're gonna have to take a decision. Do I go for this project under this risk, or do I price that in it? And that's a decision that had to be taken. On the second point that you raised about the making cash king, I do appreciate that. And I mentioned that we've got 1999 contract, which talks about dispute adjudication board. In the 2017 document, I did mention this when Desmond was asking me the question earlier on. In the 2017 document, we introduced what we call DAAB. And the difference between the DAB and the DAB is the Dispute Avoidance and Adjudication Board. So rather than appointing adjudicator when there's a problem during the course of the project, we are advocating that you appoint them at the beginning of the project, so that they are part of the team. They see the project going through. If the alarm light is coming up, before you have a dispute, you have noticed, they can come in very quickly and help to nip things in the bud and make sure things are moving forward. So I will profoundly advocate that please encourage your members. If 1999 model is something that you are comfortable with, the 2017 model is not alien. It's meant to be a better form that address this issue of cash is king. We don't want to wait for a long adjudication process or arbitration process, but we now have what we call dispute avoidance and adjudication board. So I hope that's addressed your question. So we have solved that. So I will encourage you to use the latest document. You'll find that that process is very much in place. And in fact, let me just share one thought, and I know Janah is about to come up. When I was with JICA loves this issue. They were saying, we've been training people for adjudication, but we know that we haven't got enough adjudicators in Asia Pacific. And we want you to help us train more people. And we are putting process in place now that we want to train more people in their jurisdiction, in their country, that they can adjudicate on issue. But more important, because we introduced this avoidance into our DAAB, JICA is very much loving that idea. And also ADB, and that's why Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is the new bank, approached us and they've signed up the new contract. So please, I will encourage your member, move from 1999 to 2017 so that we can address this issue. Janah, I'm back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. So I just have two short questions and then we'll wrap up. I think you're pressed for time. I've been asked by my secretariat, we have only 5 to 10 minutes. Just Doctor, on a general situation, some of the countries in the region adopt half FIDIC, half of their own thing. So I think I had this discussion with you when I met you in Manila, that if it is FIDIC, it should be FIDIC, and it should not be half of your document and half of someone else's. So because for accountability, anti-corruption, transparency, and implementation of timely completion of projects, I think it is very important that standard international document like FIDIC contracting system should be followed in this part of the world. So as president of IFAWPCA, I would like to ask you, what message do you have to give to countries that are adopting, half of your document and half of their own thing? So is this something that could happen, or do you have a different view on this?
Janah, I'm very much, FIDIC is very much in the process of promoting, and if there's something that there's a room for all of us to work together with, this is particularly one area that I believe strongly that we should work together. Of course, it isn't about commercial issue, it's one about the balance of risk. You are absolutely right. I've traveled around the world before I came into FIDIC, and I've seen documents where I'm told this is FIDIC document, but to be honest, you see the front end, it looks like FIDIC, the back end is completely different. The particular conditions and the way it's structured is being butchered. This is not good for the industry because it's misleading. You may come in as a contractor and people say, oh, this is under FIDIC 2017. You take it in good faith that is under 2017 or under 1999. And because you've used that under normal circumstances, you assume that everything there is business as usual. The truth of the matter is it's been butchered. So in answer to your question, we are keen to work at what I call global level, at regional level, at finance level, and also at country level. So how are we doing that? We've started with the banks, because we do believe that the banks have a very strong influence on government. So that's why we've got all the banks to sign up the FIDIC document. So you cannot change that document. That is it. It's it. If you are borrowing money, or government or any of the banks are funding, you use FIDIC contract, you are not allowed to butcher it. So that's number one. Number two, for me, is that I come to the region and I start to talk to regional banks. And it may be Asian Infrastructure Bank, or it may be ADB, or it may be an organization in your region. It is in our interest, in your interest, for us to work together to be able to address them and say, please, please, when you are lending or when you are promoting a project, you keep the project with FIDIC document. If you choose, of course, I would say you should use FIDIC document, but some country may say, we have our own bespoke contract. We cannot influence that. So when you and I met in Manila, one of my goals was to talk to the Philippine government, and we signed an agreement that they will use FIDIC contract, and also that we will help to train their people so that they understand the use of it and they can actually apply it in the right way. So we are both coming from the same school, and I do believe that when we kickstart this relationship between FIDIC and your organization, this will be one of the subjects that we can have on the agenda. How do we promote consistent use of FIDIC contract? What do we need to do together as a joint organization to make sure countries who are members use the FIDIC contract in the best with maintained integrity? So I'm on your side on that subject.
Thank you very much, Doctor. My final question, I would like to, as the President of IFAWPCA, formally propose formal relationship of promoting FIDIC in the Asia Pacific region. So how a working relationship to be built. So I think we should exchange documents and try to sign an MOU or something like that, so that we will have a way forward to address certain issues, and how we could train our members across, whether it is through FIDIC system or FIDIC trainers in this part of the world, like getting discounts or getting access easily. So I think we can start discussing this. And with that question, and I will try to wrap up immediately after your response to this.
Okay, my response is very simple. We had this discussion briefly in Manila. I'm a man that sticks with my words, and I assure you that definitely that's the right way to go. I think we should consider exchange of MOU that formalize the relationship, which talks about promotion of good practice, if we use the word good practice, and actually promoting a sustainable construction industry. And because the three pillars that FIDIC used talked about quality, sustainability, and integrity. All those three pillars are enshrined in FIDIC document. We will talk about how do we engage your organization as we develop projects, what I call project, new project for new contract, or where we're reviewing our contracts, so we can look at who will be a stakeholder from your group who can contribute and give us feedback. On the issue of training, we're quite keen to expand the training capability, and we are putting a new online training program that should help. And we'll look at how your members can do that. And in fact, I know that you've spoken to Mr. Fang. We've signed a similar agreement with Chinka, where we are going to help to train a lot of the Chinese companies who are working in international arena so that they know how to work with your members. And they come outside China to understand international standard, and they can actually work in collaboration. So training, view consultation on our contract document, looking at promoting best standard as possible, and a regular dialogue and exchange of view, and maybe exchanging support during your conference and our conference. We'll be delighted to take that on board. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Doctor. This has been a very useful engagement, and thank you very much for your valuable time out of your busy schedule. I know you are a very busy man, and also my colleagues here, panelists. Thank you very much, and we have board members from across all the 18 countries here, presidents of our associations here, some of our past secretary generals, including our immediate past secretary general Abdullah Muhammad, and our officers. Thank you very much for joining us today. We made it a small group because this is the first meeting with Dr. Nelson, and we are all enlightened by your valuable remarks today. It's always a pleasure to meet you. We look forward continuing this relationship. And I think the most important thing you said today was that you would include IFAWPCA in your consultation process, which makes me very happy. And that gives us the comfort that you recognize our work and as a strong federation in this part of the world. And since I took over as the president, and with the advice of the Rapporteur and my officers, we've been trying to make this organization's presence in this part of the world stronger and better. And that's what I will continue to do. And once again, my invitation for you to visit our next convention and address our opening ceremony remains valid and open.
Janah, thank you very much for your very warm, comments, which is always very, of great help. I am a strong believer that relationships start from leaders. If leaders can get things going, I'm sure that the team will follow that. You will leave a legacy when your time is over for getting this thing in momentum. And I promise you, as long as I'm still in office, I'll do my best to make sure we keep the relationship with IFAWPCA a very good one. Yes, your invitation stand. I'll be delighted to invite you to our convention as well next year. Hopefully there's no COVID-20, so yes, we can actually have a 2021 convention. I do intend that in terms of the MOU, what I would do is that I will speak to my team, and we will look at a draft MOU, which we exchange with you to look at it. And if it's appropriate, you can modify that, we move forward. And all our document coming through in future, once the MOU is in place, then we'll be absolutely keen. And one of the things I'm keen to do is actually to bring other contractors together, bring other contractors from different parts of the West, and the Asia Pacific together to look at big issue that we can solve together. And that way we can have a consistent message. So thank you very much. And thank you to all your various committee members, your support team from Manila. They're absolutely excellent. And thank you for your time. Thank you.
It has been actually an excellent relationship that has been built up. Our secretariat in Manila through Ms. Melody, and my secretariat, President's Secretariat in Maldives, have been, Susan and Melody have been doing an excellent job communicating with your team. So I think we can move forward. So it's good, and this is the milestone in our 64-year history. It's the first time one-on-one discussion with the top level of IFAWPCA like this, with the executive board. So we will write history today. Thank you very much, Doctor, for this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and I wish you all the very best. Keep safe wherever you are.
Keep safe. Thank you too. Keep safe and have a good day, and all the best, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
Everyone, thank you very much, all my colleagues. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Desmond. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Espiritu. Board members, officers, thank you very much. Thank you, Doctor. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson. Bye.